The humid air of Tortuga clung to everything, thick with the scent of salt, rum, and desperation. The year was 1692, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the crowded docks, where the usual cacophony of shouting merchants, drunken sailors, and the incessant squawking of gulls was momentarily overshadowed by a different kind of noise, the low, guttural growls of a chained man. On the deck of a merchant brigantine, the Sea Serpent, stood Kyle, a man whose skin was the color of rich earth and whose eyes held the untamed spirit of the Caribbean itself. He was stripped to the waist, his powerful frame scarred but unbowed. Iron shackles bit into his wrists and ankles, and a heavy chain secured him to the mainmast. The merchant captain, a greasy man named Bartholomew Finch, was hawking him to the motley crowd of privateers, buccaneers, and planters. "Look at him! A true savage!" Finch roared, gesturing with a hand that was missing two fingers, strong as an ox, silent as the grave, perfect for the cane fields, or as a curiosity. The crowd murmured, a mix of curiosity and disdain. Kyle met their gazes with defiance, a flicker of ancient fire in his dark eyes. He understood their words, but they would never understand him, his people, or the sacred land they had stolen from him. He had been captured during a raid on his coastal village, his family scattered, his life ripped from its roots. Now he was a spectacle, an item to be bought and sold. Despair was a bitter taste, but his pride was a burning ember. Suddenly, a hush fell over a section of the crowd. A figure emerged from the shadows of a nearby warehouse, cutting through the common folk like a sharp blade. It was Captain Ilara Vance, known throughout the Lesser Antilles as the Crimson Corsair. Her reputation preceded her, a woman who commanded respect, fear, and an unwavering loyalty from her crew. She was clad in practical dark leather, a cutlass hilt peeking from beneath her coat, and a tricorn hat perched jauntily on her fiery red hair. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, scanned the scene, settling on Kyle with an intensity that made even Finch flinch. Ilara had come to Tortuga for supplies, not slaves, but the sight of the chained man ignited a spark of indignation within her. She had seen enough brutality in her life at sea to know injustice when she saw it. This man was not a savage. He was a warrior, captured and humiliated. "What's the price for this curiosity, Captain Finch?" Ilara's voice was low, yet it carried across the dock with an undeniable authority. Finch puffed out his chest, sensing an opportunity. "Ah, Captain Vance. A pleasure. For you, a special price. Let's say 500 pieces of 8 for this magnificent specimen." A collective gasp went through the crowd. 500 was an outrageous sum for a single captive, especially one deemed a savage. Ilara's first mate, a burly man named Silas, stepped forward, his hand resting on his pistol. "Captain, that's highway robbery." Ilara simply raised a hand, silencing him. Her gaze remained fixed on Kale, who for the first time looked directly back at her. There was no fear in his eyes, only a potent mixture of suspicion and a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of hope. He saw not a savior, but a powerful woman, a force to be reckoned with. 500, you say? Ilara mused, her voice unwavering. She reached into her coat, pulling out a heavy leather pouch. The clinking of coins was the only sound as she tossed it onto the deck at Finch's feet. "I'll pay for his life, and for his freedom." Finch's eyes widened, then narrowed greedily as he knelt to examine the coins. They were genuine, more than enough. He grinned, a nasty, toothy display. "Done! The savage is yours, Captain Vance. But mind you, he's a wild one. Don't say I didn't warn you." Ilara ignored him. She drew her cutlass, the glint of steel reflecting the harsh sunlight. The crowd held its breath, expecting her to threaten Kyle. Instead, she walked calmly towards him. The chain that bound Kale to the mast was thick, but the lock was a simple one. With a swift, practiced movement, Ilara brought the cutlass down, striking the lock with precision. The metal shrieked, then snapped, freeing the chain. Cale stood, flexing his wrists, the marks of the iron still stark against his skin. He looked at the broken lock, then at Ilara, a silent question in his eyes. "You're free," she said, her voice softer now, but still firm. "No chains, no master, but you owe me your life, and for now you'll sail with my crew on the sea serpent's kiss." Cale studied her, his gaze intense. He had never trusted outsiders, especially those who spoke with such authority. Yet she had bought him, not to enslave him further, but to release him. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The word free resonated deep within him. It was a word he thought he'd never hear again. Silas, still wary, watched Cale as Ilara turned to address her crew. "Lads, haul anchor, we have a new guest." As Kyle stepped onto the deck of the Sea Serpent's Kiss, the ship that would now be his temporary home, he felt the rocking beneath his feet, a familiar sensation from his youth, but also a profound sense of the unknown. He was no longer chained, but he was far from home, bound to a woman who had bought his freedom with a captain's ransom. His journey, he knew, had only just begun. Life aboard the Sea Serpent's Kiss was a whirlwind for Kyle. He was given simple, sturdy clothes and a hammock in the crew's quarters. The initial suspicion from Ilara's crew, a diverse mix of hardened sailors and former indentured servants, slowly gave way to a grudging respect. Kyle, despite his quiet demeanor, proved to be an invaluable asset. He had an innate understanding of the sea, honed from generations of living by its rhythms. He could predict changes in the weather with uncanny accuracy. His keen eyesight spotted distant sails long before anyone else, and his strength made him adept at handling ropes and sails. Ilara, meanwhile, found herself drawn to Kyle in ways she hadn't anticipated. She was a woman hardened by the sea, her heart guarded by layers of steel forged in a world that expected women to be weak. Yet Cale's silent strength, his quiet dignity, and the profound sadness in his eyes stirred something within her. She would often find him on deck at night, gazing at the stars, a yearning in his posture that mirrored her own longing for a world that treated her as an equal. One evening, during a lull in their journey towards a rumored Spanish treasure galleon, Ilara found Cale on the foredeck, sharpening a crude spear he had fashioned from a piece of driftwood. The moonlight glinted off the makeshift blade. "Thinking of home, Kyle?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Always." His voice was deep, a rumble that carried the weight of his land. It was the first time she had heard him speak more than a few words. "Tell me about it," she urged, settling onto a coil of rope nearby. He hesitated, then began to speak, slowly at first, describing his village, nestled by a vibrant coral reef, the taste of fresh mangoes, the sound of ancient drums, the laughter of his family. He spoke of the spirits of the land and sea, of a life intricately woven with nature. Ilara listened, captivated, her own life of raids and escapes suddenly feeling stark and empty in comparison. Their conversations became more frequent, often late at night when the rest of the crew slept. Ilara learned of Cale's wisdom, his deep connection to his heritage, and the pain of loss that he carried. Kyle, in turn, began to see beyond the crimson corsair. He saw a woman of immense courage, a leader who cared for her crew, and beneath the hardened exterior, a fiercely independent spirit who, like him, was an outsider in a world determined to define her. One day, while sailing through a narrow channel between two heavily forested islands, a sudden squall descended upon them. The winds howled, tearing at the sails, and the waves grew monstrous, threatening to capsize the ship. Chaos erupted on deck as the crew struggled to control the Sea Serpent's Kiss. "Batten down the hatches! Secure the mainmast!" Ilara shouted over the roar of the wind, her voice strained. A rogue wave slammed into the ship, throwing several crewmen overboard. Among them was Silas, who, despite his gruffness, was fiercely loyal to Ilara. Kyle, without a moment's hesitation, sprang into action. He grabbed a coil of rope, tied it around his waist, and dove into the raging sea. Ilara watched, her heart pounding as Kyle battled the ferocious waves. He was a powerful swimmer, effortlessly cutting through the tumultuous water towards Silas, who was struggling against the current. After what felt like an eternity, Kyle reached Silas, secured a rope around him, and with the help of the crew, they were both hauled back onto the ship. Silas, sputtering and coughing, clapped Kyle on the back. You saved my hide, savage," he choked out, a rare grin on his face. Kyle simply nodded, water streaming from his hair and body. Ilara, however, walked directly to him, her eyes shining with an emotion he couldn't quite decipher. "Kyle," she began, her voice thick with gratitude and something more, "you risked your life." "Why?" He looked at her, his dark eyes unwavering. "You gave me back mine." In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them, a bond forged in the heart of the storm. The crew, witnessing Kyle's heroic act, now saw him not as a savage, but as one of their own. Ilara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. It was trust, deep and unequivocal, and with it came a fragile, blossoming hope for something more. But the seas of the Caribbean were as treacherous as the hearts of men. As the storm abated, a new threat emerged on the horizon. A Spanish war galleon, its cannons gleaming, was bearing down on them. Finch, the merchant captain who had sold Kyle, a notorious opportunist and secret informant for the Spanish crown, had tipped them off. He had seen Kyle on Ilara's ship and knew the value of the savage to the Spanish, who sought to quash any native resistance. "Battle stations!" Ilara roared, her hand instinctively going to her cutlass. The moment of peace and burgeoning intimacy was shattered, replaced by the grim reality of their lives. Kyle stood by her side, ready, his eyes fixed on the approaching enemy. He was no longer just a rescued man. He was a warrior, standing with his chosen, albeit unconventional, family. The battle was a maelstrom of smoke and steel. The Spanish galleon, a leviathan of war, battered the sea serpent's kiss with cannon fire. Splinters flew, and sails ripped as Ilara, the fiery captain, rallied her crew, a beacon of courage in the chaos. Kyle fought with a primal ferocity, his movements fluid and precise. He was a silent shadow, a guardian in the storm, instinctively protecting Ilara as he took down Spanish marines. When a hulking officer cornered her, Kyle lunged, his raw strength and fierce protectiveness shining through as he swiftly disarmed the man. Ilara, breathless, looked at Kyle, her heart hammered with a truth that transcended the battle. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom, he was fighting for her. Just as victory seemed near, a stray cannonball struck the mainmast, pinning Ilara beneath a heavy timber. She cried out in pain, a rare sound of vulnerability from the fearless captain. "Leave me, Kyle. Get the crew to safety," she ordered, her voice laced with pain. But Kyle shook his head, his jaw set. Never. With a surge of strength and ingenuity, he used the ship's rigging to create a makeshift pulley system. He pulled on the ropes with a mighty grunt, joined by Silas and the rallying crew, and together they managed to lift the timber just enough for Ilara to drag herself free. The Spanish, demoralized, began to retreat. The sea serpent's kiss, though battered, was unbowed. The Spanish galleon, its captain dead and crew decimated, limped away into the horizon. As the sun set, a weary calm settled over the deck. Ilara, leaning on Silas, looked at Kyle. The battle had stripped away all pretense. "Kyle," she said, her voice hoarse, "you saved me." He met her gaze, his dark eyes filled with tenderness. He gently touched her cheek. My life is yours, Ilara, as you once gave me mine. She leaned into his touch, and the chaos of the battle faded away. All that remained was the warmth of his hand, his strength, and the undeniable truth that had blossomed between them. The fierce pirate captain, the Crimson Corsair, had found a true partner, an equal, a love forged in shared hardship. The Sea Serpent's kiss sailed on, carrying a crew united by loyalty and a love that had defied all odds. Kyle, once a captive, was now a free man, a warrior, and a lover. His heart had found a home on the restless seas, with the woman who had dared to pay for his life. He would continue his journey to find his people, but he would not walk it alone. He would walk it with Ilara, the Crimson Corsair, by his side.